paper is titled The Darkness Behind the Turban, the Moor and Islamophobia, and Charlotte Dacre's Zofloya. So Charlotte Dacre conjures a gripping Gothic story full of lust, desire, and starring Satan in her 1806 novel Zofloya, or The Moor, which documents the lives of an aristocratic family living in 15th century Venice. Zofloya focuses on the life of Victoria, a wealthy and indulged young woman whose mother is seduced by a German count and abandons her family. After the count kills her father in a duel, Victoria is sent to live with her tyrannical cousin in an attempt to restrain her from an affair with her beloved Berenza. She forges a letter and manages to escape, seeking refuge with Berenza, whose trepidation at her fickle nature is quelled when she takes the stab in her arm from a would-be assassin sent by Berenza's former mistress to kill him. She neglects to mention that this assassin is also her brother and accepts Berenza's offer of marriage. Eventually, she finds herself attracted to his brother, Enrique, and with much dramatic action and extensive detail, she gives herself over to her overwhelming greed, jealousy, and sexual desires, which eventually lead her to committing multiple homicides. In the midst of her descent, she befriends and lusts after her brother-in-law's Moorish servant, Zofloya, who becomes her partner in kidnapping and murder. At the novel's end, Victoria's rat mother returns. She is filled with guilt and abused by her husband. She begs for forgiveness from her children on her deathbed. When Victoria finally turns to Zofloya to tell him about her guilt, he unmasks himself, reveals that he is Satan, and annihilates her. Through its dark themes and myriad tropes of magic, murder, and madness, Zofloya encapsulates almost all of Gothic literature's core elements. In this paper, I explore the ways in which Dacre's novel, typical of novels of her era and location, demonizes Gothic darkness through race, using the Moor to represent evil, dangerous, and seductive dark knowledge. Critics have offered terrific readings on the ways in which race functions in the context of the novel in terms of cattle slavery and the Black Atlantic, but have not generally focused specifically on Zofloya's Moorish identity and its importance. Contemporary scholars examine the text as a critique of the relations between the West Indies and England. They focus on the text in the context of the 19th century, particularly on the dialogue surrounding abolition. For example, S.D. Scotland says the following in her essay, The Slave Revenge, The Terror in Charlotte Dacre's Zofloya. Scotland compares Dacre's novel to other works that negotiate the fear of revolt and notes that its 1806 release, a year before the end of the British trade in enslaved peoples, coincided with the anxiety about, quote, next steps. And she notes that Zofloya reflects British anxieties about Black men and their active role in rebellion, particularly following the Haitian Revolution. In his piece, NAME, Kim Michaswi considers the relationship between Zofloya and Victoria within the context of the master and slave relationship. He suggests that, quote, Victoria and Zofloya be understood with reference to African slaves and their European masters, and he argues the following. Like Scotland, he examines the recurring theme of revolutionary and retaliatory violence associated by white Britons with Black people at the time. While Michaswi and Scotland and other scholars make excellent points about the ways that the novel's configuration of race reads in the cultural and legal climate surrounding the text publication, they fail to grapple with the specific significance of the Moorish element in the story. My essay builds on the focus of how anti-Blackness works in the novel, but shifts the focus to the ways Zofloya Moor's ancestry functions in the text. Zofloya demonizes non-Christian doctrine and reveals the Islamophobia of the early 19th century England. Dacre's novel both speculatively evokes Islamophobia, figuring her more as the quintessential Gothic monster, as she also makes visible the value and power of the Moorish history her character embodies. My essay focuses on the importance of the Islamic aspects in the characterization of Zofloya. For example, the way in which his power reflects particular Eurocentric imaginings of Islam, to argue that despite the way in which the novel locates his, quote, magical power in the Christian conception of the devil, Zofloya's compelling monstrosity is specifically an Islamic one. Zofloya as a Moorish Satan is imagined as a powerful monster whose power rests particularly in his attractiveness to the white European woman. Zofloya casts a spell not only on the Gothic heroine, but on readers. Here, Dacre builds on the Gothic literature's, quote, foreign man trope, in which male villains are portrayed as corrupt, quote, foreign individuals who act on their desires, having strayed from, quote, good Christian doctrines. They are often imagined threats to the racial purity and are easy targets of Anglo-xenophobia. For authors like Dacre, they are both objects of fetish and fetishization and of fear and fury. Scholar Sophia Rose Arjona, in her book Muslims in the Western Imagination, highlights how these, quote, foreign others connect with the Gothic monster. She says the following. Zofloya's magnetic characterization invites us critically to think about the role he plays against the white backdrop. The dark, dangerous foreign other both engenders the white woman's erotic, and in this case, literally criminal passion, and renders her a victim of his scheme. Zofloya is presented as an all-powerful, dangerous, and cunning seducer. He understands how Victoria's thoughts are corrupted by her desire, and so he can play with her emotions. In a classic morality tale, once he has, quote, possessed the European woman, he triumphs while she dies in her misery. In one critical discussion I have been able to find about the Islamophobia in Dacre's novel, Arjona notes this about the British imaginary. Both Zofloya's attraction and the mistakes he makes are through his foreign, Muslim, othered self, forced to assimilate, further exploiting his character through the lens of proper European whiteness. Victoria's European white femininity is central to her character, regardless of her inability to conform to Christian European ideals of femininity. Her innate position in society ensures that Zofloya will not only satisfy her desires because of the racial dynamic between them, the fetishization of his character through the white feminine gaze positions her above all, even when she acts on mutual desire. Her thoughts about the Moorish servant flutter between admiration, lust, and embarrassment. The novel says the following. He provides Victoria with the affection that she does not receive from her loved ones. However, even through his kindness, he knows how she truly feels about him. Victoria looks down upon Zofloya because of his race, even though he now owns her. And this is what Zofloya says. In the traditional Faustian move, in which Dacre concludes her text, when Zofloya discloses himself as Satan, he justifies his actions because she agreed to his conditions in exchange for her own desire. Zofloya humbles her character. Even if she does not learn this lesson herself, the reader can still benefit. On the one hand, the lesson is do not stray from traditional chastity and the arena of white feminity's class based on sexual propriety, a lesson driven home by Victoria's mother's fall from grace. The world of the novel uses Victoria as an example of excess, white, privileged, feminine desire, but Zofloya bears the brunt of the blame because of his race. Contemporary critics have discussed the alignment of racialized others and overly sexual femininity, but Zofloya does not need to do much. Victoria was already on the path of madness. One reading of the novel would presume that her erotic fetishization of a Black servant epitomizes that madness for good or ill in a Eurocentric worldview. On the other hand, I argue that even as the novel overtly indicates the, quote, foreign other and shores up racist and sexist notions of Eurocentric purity, we can also look at the ways the novel simultaneously exposes Islamophobia and reveals a Eurocentric fear and fascination with the power not just of the devil, but of the Islamic Moor. Dacre, like others writing during her time, depicted Moorish characters as obtaining knowledge and power through Christian satanic practices, because how else could a character or a group of people be so powerful? However, Zofloya's knowledge and skill are linked specifically to his Moorish ancestry. With the 15th century as our backdrop, Dacre weaves elements of Moorish history to give Zofloya a backstory and intertwine it with the Gothic elements of her text. This is what she writes. Zofloya belongs to powerful lineage, the Abdul Rahmans, the oldest Moorish family several dynasties removed from power. He connects to his ancestry and uses this knowledge and power in specific ways in his everyday life. For example, Zofloya gets injured and he knows how to treat his wounds through the scientific expertise of the Moors of Granada. The choice Dacre made to make Zofloya the title of the book showcases the attitudes of that period in European history. Dacre produces a villain who, because of his race and time period, leaves contemporary readers more invested in his storyline as they explore his character from a new perspective. The rest of the characters are background compared to the utterances of Zofloya. The Moor dazzles the reader not only with his skills, but also with his physical appearance. Victoria dreams of Zofloya, and she describes him as such. His attire in her dreams mirrors the royal clothing worn by the Moorish people. Jacob van Utrecht crafts a painting called The Triptych with Adoration that has two Black men depicted in Moorish-style clothing. Little to none is known about this painting, but they appear alongside religious figures, and this is what the painting looks like. The black man in the light blue shawl has a majestic quality Dacre describes in Zofloya. And then Victoria continues her description of Zofloya, and she says the following. She describes him as, quote, perfectly symmetrical and possessing a smile that emphasizes stunning features. These descriptions make his character appealing to read because although he has gone through some tragic events, he still stands on his own. By Dacre describing his charms, this makes one root for the mind tricks he plays on Victoria. His villainous qualities instead are a reaction to the cruel nature of living in Italy, and one feels excitement that he can now have control over his life. The preservation of his culture showcases the ways Europeans wanted the Moors to assimilate after their exile. Zofloya has been revealed as Satan, but is he? Victoria creates her own demise, and the Moors' blame should be separate from her personal blame. Victoria has been deceived by the white men of this book along with her mother, but why does no one blame the other characters for Victoria's downward spiral? Zofloya does not need to do much more. Victoria was already on that trajectory. Arjana writes in her books, Muslims in the Western Imagination, on the Gothic monster, and this is what she says. These monsters created scapegoats for the problems faced in society. Spain, for example, enacted the Limpieza de Sangre laws in the 15th century to help purify the country of Jewish and Moorish blood they viewed as vile. The prejudices against the Moors continued creating tension that lasted and is evident in the portrayal of them in literature over the next centuries. In his book, Islam in the Victorian 19th century perceptions of Muslim practice and belief, Khan discusses how Europe's relationship to Islam has shifted over time. He explained how Muslim rulers used to ally with European countries in different historical contexts, such as the fight in Italy for the Lombard princes, and this is what he states. He describes the ways in which fiction played a particularly powerful role in perpetuating Eurocentrism, and then he continues. The conditioning literature did to villainize Muslims speaks to the attitudes of preserving a white Christian country, further alienating these people from society. I suggest that Dacre's novel is usefully understood within this context. On the one hand, certainly the novel participates in this villainization/alienization. However, Dacre produces a villain whose anti-heroic energy overcomes the text. Dacre may have intended to write these qualities as monstrous, but their energy and success remain central to the modern audience's sympathy for Zofloya. Zofloya not only embodies the familiar characteristics of the Gothic anti-hero, always, quote, othered, and with plenty of his smolder, but she creates a Moorish anti-hero who personifies Blackness metaphorically. Zofloya's perseverance in the preservation of his culture directly opposes Eurocentric desires, and while the novel's intentions may be to critique Zofloya's opposition, it showcases Moorish traditions and their visibility in Europe. Thank you.